The Denver Broncos have secured their first winning season since 2016 and are one step closer to the playoffs after they rallied against the Indianapolis Colts. How did Nik Bonitto and Marvin Mims change the outcome of this game for the second game in a row? We'll break that down much more in today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day. Thank you so much to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers, all the first listeners out there who've been rocking with us since the inception. We got you covered every single day, all year long, when it comes to your favorite team, the Denver Broncos, who are now securing their first winning season since 2016. A lot to be excited about here. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com, also writer over there at NFL Spin Zone here. And look, Broncos Country, there's a lot we got to break down on today's post-game report. It's another victory Monday here. The Broncos improved to 9-5. We'll hand out our game balls after this big-time victory. And it wasn't a pretty game here for the Broncos. They found a way to overcome. But the offensive struggles were a concern in Sunday's game against a defense that wasn't necessarily the greatest in the Indianapolis Colts. And we'll obviously kick things off by Denver jumping up to the 6th seed, improving. We mentioned 9-5 here. But how did the Broncos score 24 unanswered points after a turning point where their backs were against the wall? That's what we're going to break down on today's episode of the show, which is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. You can start this season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Sayre, kick us off here. It was ugly for 3 quarters here for the Denver Broncos against the Colts, and it seemed like that their backs were against the wall. They were on the ropes there, and it looked like Jonathan Taylor was about to deliver the final blow to the Broncos' tiebreaker against them essentially here in this game, but the ball bounced the Broncos' way.
It was like a scene out of Dodgeball, Cody, at the end of the movie where they're like, wait a second, after White Goodman, hits Peter LaFleur with the ball. They're like, wait a second, upon further review, his foot was on the line type of thing. As Jonathan Taylor scores a touchdown to put the Colts up 20-7, or would have been 20-7. And we're all sitting there and we're all like, man, the season is over. The Broncos are cooked. This is terrible. This feels awful. You didn't show up in the biggest moment. And then everybody on Twitter is like, wait just a second. He might have dropped the ball at the goal line and it might have gone through the end zone for a touchback. This might be Broncos football. Sure enough, that was the turning point in the game, Cody. 24 unanswered points after that particular juncture in the game, which, I mean, you saw Sean Payton in the post-game press conference on Sunday. He basically had to bite his tongue when asked, like, what do you teach your players on that kind of stuff? And he was like, he was like, basically, you don't want that to be one of my players, essentially, is kind of the vibe that I was getting from him, Cody. A ridiculous play to virtually save the Denver Broncos season. As we know, the playoff implications from this game with a loss, I mean, it basically brought the Broncos from a 90-something% chance of making the postseason to about a coin flips chance.
The stadium, I'm at a loss for words here. The stadium was dead quiet. They were booing the Broncos after they went down. Because, yeah, you mentioned, like, Jonathan Taylor rattled off this one run where he goes untouched. Like, nobody touched him. And then for the replay to kind of bounce up and the crowd's like, uh-oh. Like, for Denver to respond from that manner and right there and obviously score 24 unanswered points is a huge story. But really, Sayre, that was the turning point of this game. But the bigger turning point that we talk about in terms of player performance, like Denver's offense still couldn't get going. They were still struggling. But you know who it was? For 2 games in a row, the Broncos have had 2 Oklahoma Sooners players step up and really revitalize, change the course of the game. And that's exactly what happened. And it all started with Marvin Mims, who had a couple of nice returns on the night, but really the biggest one came on a 60-yarder where he outmaneuvered the entire Colts special teams unit. And then after that, the Broncos, they found a way, like I think it was 15 yards out. And so Nate Atkins catches a touchdown pass here from Bo Nix, and that gives the Broncos their first lead of the game. It gave them a 17-13 lead at that point because they were down 13-10. And it just seemed like anytime the Broncos would try to do something offensively, some negative play would happen, a turnover, which we'll certainly get into here in today's show. Obviously talking about Bo Nix and the Broncos offensive struggles. But then all of a sudden, the Broncos defense is back out there on the field after their first two series where they seemingly couldn't stop Anthony Richardson and the Colts offense. They found a way to get some big plays, and probably the biggest play of the game here, really outside of Marvin's return, was Nik Bonitto. 2 games in a row getting a pick 6 here. We all saw the Marshawn Lynch type celebration in the end zone, but that play right there really busted it open here for the Broncos. They took a 24-13 lead at that point. I mean, these guys, the Sooners, they came up with big plays when the Broncos needed it the most, and all of a sudden, the electricity in the atmosphere at Empire Field at Mile High, it had changed. Sayre, I think you said something in our preview show leading up to is that you believe that there was going to be some Mile High magic. Mile High magic was on display in Sunday's game. Like I said, it wasn't pretty at all. It was ugly, but Denver, I think after 3 quarters, man, they turned it on, and it was pretty after that.
Yeah, I can't remember what the exact prediction was now, Cody. I can't remember if it was like 4 turnovers or something like that, but the Colts ended up having 5 turnovers in this game, which is wild. And the Mile High magic was in full effect. I mean, you want to talk about the play from Jonathan Taylor, followed by the what's being determined as a fumble recovered for a touchdown, even though it was like a pass to A.D. Mitchell, who tried to pass it back to
so dumb.
Anthony Richardson. It's very weird scoring by the NFL because there was nothing fumble about it whatsoever, but a brilliant play nonetheless. Pat Surtain getting into the mix. Obviously, Cody, PJ Locke delivering a big-time game-changing hit, and DJ Jones kind of Johnny on the spot there as well. A lot of the turnovers in this game, it felt like there was a graphic that the CBS crew pulled up at one point that said, Colts, 3 turnovers, points off turnovers, 3. Broncos, turnovers, 3. Points off turnovers, 3. I mean, it was like that was how tough sledding it was all game long in this particular matchup, because these two teams, Cody, are fighting for essentially their playoff lives. And really, you got that vibe from the very start of this game. Like, it was an absolute dogfight. It was sloppy. It didn't look good from the Broncos' perspective at all times. But look, sometimes you just need that little bit of Mile High magic, right? And the Denver Broncos, they got it at the perfect time to get that 9th win, now their first winning season since 2016.
It's been a while since the Broncos have been in this position. They're 1 win away from 10. And look, the schedule here for Denver now gets a little bit tougher. You got a Thursday night football matchup against the Chargers, who are coming off of a loss now because the Broncos won and the Chargers lost on Sunday. It puts the Broncos right now at that 6th seed. So, hey, Thursday's game's got some massive implications here for the Broncos, but they may be without a couple of key players, Sayre. Obviously, a couple of Broncos went down in this game. DJ Jones left the game with a finger injury, did not return. Quinn Miners left the game with a shoulder injury in the 3rd quarter. Luckily, he returned in the 4th quarter. That's a great sign there. And then you obviously lost, for the Broncos, Pat Surtain took a nasty shot in the lower leg. I felt like that was kind of a cheap play there by Josh Downs of the Colts there after Pat had that pick, going a little too low there. And then Pat kind of re-aggravated his ankle and was helped off the field with trainers, arm around each one. He was able to walk into the locker room on his own. I will say this, post-game in the locker room, we didn't get a chance to talk with Pat. I mean, he walked by, acknowledged each other there, but he looked like he was walking okay, which is a good sign. Who knows? And obviously his dad put a tweet out there saying, hey, he's got a certain type of blood in him. He's going to be good to go. But this is something to monitor because you're playing on Thursday Night Football. The Broncos are a little banged up after this game, and potentially something to monitor. Could they be without PS2 and Riley Moss against the Chargers? That would not be an ideal situation here for a short week turnaround. But Broncos Country, we want to hear from you, your thoughts, your emotions on a roller coaster type game at Empire Field at Mile High. The Broncos scored 24 unanswered points to beat the Colts 31-13, 9-5. In a position now to make the postseason for the first time since the Super Bowl 50 season. A special win here for the Broncos. It wasn't pretty, but it was gritty. But what about the Broncos' offensive struggles in this game? The offense wasn't pretty all game long. We'll highlight what happened with Bo Nix and what could have been his worst game as a pro. We'll highlight that and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. How do you stay cozy during the winter months? For some, wrapping up in a blanket with a mug of hot chocolate or watching a movie with family is the best way to spend the month of December. Therapy is also a great way to bring yourself some comfort that never goes away, even when the season changes. And the holidays can be tough for a lot of people. I've been in that position before, but I've utilized BetterHelp therapy before in the past, and I found it very beneficial for me at a time in my life where I felt like I needed it the most. And I think that benefit me the most was obviously being able to connect with someone who's an unbiased source on my life. I tell them what's going on with me, and they give me feedback. They give me tools that I can use in my day-to-day life to deal with stress, anxiety, and other things that I run into, and I'm sure other people run into in their day-to-day lives. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and best of all, suited to your schedule to meet you wherever you're at. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So check it out today. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Today's show is also brought to you by College Football Playoffs on TNT, and it is that time of the year. The College Football Playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoffs begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff Kickoff Show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, which is the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So don't miss a moment of the action and watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate, live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Once again, watch College Football Playoff presented by Allstate, which is live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max.
The Denver Broncos put 31 points on the board in a victory in Week 15 against the Indianapolis Colts. Bo Nix had 3 touchdown passes, but why was this maybe the worst offensive performance that we've seen in quite some time? Well, Cody and I are going to break down some of the major concerns offensively coming out of this game, this win for the Denver Broncos, and what they need to do to get back on the right course. But Broncos Country, thanks so much for rocking with us here. Victory Monday as we celebrate the Denver Broncos being 9-5, getting one step closer to hopefully reaching the playoffs. And thanks so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day as we approach hopefully some postseason episodes of the show. If you haven't already done so, hit subscribe so you don't miss a single one. Cody, this is a weird thing, because if the Broncos would have scored 31 points at pretty much any other time over the last 8 years, we'd probably be like, man, what a performance by the offense. Obviously, you get 2 defensive touchdowns against the Cleveland Browns. Now you get another defensive touchdown against the Indianapolis Colts, but still, I mean, even 24 points being put up by this offense, it felt like there was so much meat left on the bone. It felt like they were just trying to sprint up a 90-degree incline. I mean, it was rough going for the offense in this game against Indy.
Ruff is putting it nicely here. I mean, Sayre, to be honest with you, the Broncos offense, it was terrible in Sunday's game here against the Colts. And look, a large story of this game was the offense's inability to move the ball and also turnovers. I mean, the Broncos, they go down early in this game because Anthony Richardson finds a way to connect on third down on a couple of plays, and then he runs for a 23-yard touchdown untouched, and now Denver's down. They're in a position trailing 7-0 at that point. And then Bo Nix in the offense, they go down, they throw an interception. And I mean, it wasn't a good interception. Bo had 3 bad picks in today's game. And to be honest with you, Sayre, I think that obviously Bo's got a large portion of the blame for terms of the offense's production on Sunday here, because he's the one who threw the 3 interceptions here. But the issue that I have here with Denver's offense, and it is the most glaring concern that we have had all season long, the Broncos have no run game. I mean, Sayre, how many times did we watch this game on Sunday where, okay, Denver's passing on first down. Okay, it's 2nd and 10, or it's 2nd and 7, 2nd and 6. They go to run the ball. They can't even get a yard. Or if it's 3rd and 1 or 2nd and 1, they're going backwards here. I mean, I sat up there in the press box there with my binoculars. I'm sitting there as the Broncos have the ball on the offensive side, and I'm watching Bo Nix hand the football off to Javonte Williams or Jaleel McLaughlin. And then I'm watching a swarm of Colts defenders just get there. Like there's no hole opening up, or they're not hitting it quick enough, or it's closing. And all of a sudden, like, this was a game we talked about. The Broncos facing the 31st ranked run defense in the NFL, and all of a sudden they can't even get a yard. The Broncos in this game, Sayre, which is crazy to think about, right? 31 points. They finished the game with 193 net yards of total offense in this game, okay? Bo Nix had 130 yards passing in this game. He had 23 yards rushing in the game. He was the Broncos' leading rusher, Sayre, from Sunday. So when Bo's got 23 yards, he's the leading rusher, you have 193 net yards of offense, and Bo's responsible for 153 of them. That's a huge problem here. And look, it's not all on Bo Nix. I think he made up for it with 3 touchdown passes, so it kind of evens out 0-0. 3 interceptions. They were bad ones. 3 touchdowns. I thought he came up with some big plays to Troutman, obviously Nate Adkins, and then a nice, touchdown connection on a double move to Cortland Sutton. He made up for it, but my goodness, if the Broncos can't run the football, Sayre, these next 3 games, they're going to be hard for them to overcome.
Well, you're not going to get 5 turnovers every game necessarily. I know I said that last season, and then they ended up on a streak of like 3 or 4 games with at least 4 or 5. I mean, you're not going to have that every game. And also, too, I mean, you gotta give a shout out to Marvin Mims, as we will continue to do. Spoiler alert later in the show. I mean, setting you up with great field position. That was really the story of this game, was the Broncos kind of being gifted. And Sean Payton acknowledged it after the game, is like, we spent the majority of the second half or fourth quarter on their end of the field. And that's just the truth of the matter. So yes, you were gifted some short fields. No, the analytics bros are not going to like this performance from Bo Nix. And I think that I even tweeted this out during the game, Cody. I mean, I felt like it was one of his worst games since, the week 2 against Pittsburgh, week 1 against Seattle. Just kind of had that
100%.
feel where sloppiness in the pocket, not setting his feet at times, getting a little trigger happy with his throws, and just not looking comfortable. I think after that first interception, it just felt like you were kind of holding your breath every time he dropped back, and apparently for good reason, because he ended up with 3 interceptions. But I think we would be remiss not to acknowledge the regression in this game from Denver receivers in terms of dropping passes. Cortland Sutton, a couple of drops. Troy Franklin, a drop, at least 1 drop. And depending on how you score the one in the end zone, that was a pretty good throw. He had a drop. Devon Vele, drop. So Javonte Williams, drop. I think you look at this game in terms of the flow of the offense and everything filtering from that running game not being there. And the greatest indicator to me was a key 3rd and 1 where Bo threw an interception. And you had an opportunity. It's 3rd and 1. I think they were even past midfield at that point.
Yeah.
You can't even run the ball. I mean, I get that, like, the running game's not successful, but Audric Estime should be able to go fall forward for a yard, or Javonte Williams. I mean, at the very least, he could get you a yard, right? Michael Burton, Bo Nix, the quarterback sneak. You don't have enough confidence in your running game at this point to even get a yard past midfield on 3rd and 1. Like, that is the state of where things are at. I can't believe there was ever a debate or a discussion about this subject in the Broncos running game being good or even average. It's not good in any particular way, shape, or form.
No, it's not. I mean, you look at it, like I said, Bo Nix, 8 rushing attempts for 23 yards. I think one of those, his longest run was 16 yards, and it was like on a scamper where he slid. That was early on in the game. This wasn't like, collective. So that 16-yard, I think, came in that first series, if I'm not mistaken here. Jaleel McLaughlin, 7 carries for 21 yards, 3.0 yards per carry average. Javonte Williams, 6 carries, 15 yards, 2.5 yard per carry average. And all of a sudden, it's like, we're having the same discussions here about Denver's offense. And it's like, Bo Nix, I understand he was pressing quite a bit. Look, this was not a great game from Bo Nix, not a good game at all. I think it's fair to say that, yes, sir, this was one of his worst games of his rookie career. I think this is the first game that we've seen Bo maybe regress a little bit since he kind of really got things going after that week 2 game against the Steelers. I mean, this was it. But this can't be the story here for the Broncos in these final 3 games, especially if they're a team that's going to make it into the postseason. It's inexcusable for Bo Nix to lead your team in rushing on 8 attempts for 23 yards. Inexcusable. That's not winning football. That's going to get you bounced out in blowout fashion in the postseason, and that's something the Broncos are going to have to overcome. So while we're obviously celebrating a victory Monday here, there are things here that we are concerned about here with the Broncos offense, and this is something that Sean Payton said as well. He said, we want to go back and watch that film. We like that we know the outcome of the game, but we're not going to like the game film. He said, we're not going to like what we see there. And now you don't have a lot of time to really kind of turn things around, because now you have to face the Los Angeles Chargers, who are going to be hungry coming off of a loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home. So now you get that game on Thursday Night Football, and there's so many questions about who's going to be healthy enough to play. What's it going to look like here? Thankfully, the Broncos found a way to win this game because it would have been dire straits if they would have lost here. And the offense would have been a big reason why they lost. The defense, I felt like, too. Sayre, you mentioned it. They would get the ball back for the offense, and then the offense would just punt it a couple of plays later. Like, that, to me, was very frustrating from how we've seen this offense operate. This definitely was not the performance we'd like to see from them. They're going to need a bounce back here on Thursday Night Football if they're going to want to win, especially in these final 3 games here. You want to secure a playoff berth? It starts here with that. The offense has to get better here. But one thing we are going to do, Broncos Country, we're going to end the show on a positive note here. We're going to hand out our game balls to a couple of players as well. We also want you to send in your Broncos game ball recipients here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know, at FanDuel, it is America's #1 sportsbook, and they want you to get ready to tackle the NFL action inside of their app here today, because right now, new customers, they can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The Broncos against the Indianapolis Colts at one point were 4.5-point favorites as the game got a little bit closer here, and they obviously covered that. So if you placed $5 on the money line for Denver or for them to cover the spread, you should have $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game as it's ongoing, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets. It is the place for all your NFL action. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started and join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The fourth quarter of today's Locked On Broncos post-game report is here, and you know what it means after a victory Monday. We're going to hand out our game balls to a couple of Broncos who are very deserving. And Sayre, I think when we look at it here, do we hand out a game ball to someone on the offensive side of the ball in terms of offensive performance? I just feel like there wasn't one that necessarily stood out. Maybe we could do one to the tight ends, Nate Adkins, Adam Troutman, both guys on the on the receiving end of catching a touchdown. Wasn't National Tight Ends Day the way it was against the Atlanta Falcons, but both those guys came up big for the Broncos. Cortland caught a nice touchdown from Bo Nix on a nice little double move. I felt like he ran a terrific route there, but I don't feel like the offense had anybody stand out enough that warrants like, hey, you get a game ball. Instead, I think there's one guy who plays on the offensive side of the ball, but it really impacted the special team side in this game. I think we have to give a game ball here to Marvin Mims. That's probably the easy consensus one. The other one's going to be a home run one as well in terms of the eyes of Broncos Country.
Absolutely. Marvin Mims definitely gets a game ball. Just a couple of game-changing returns in this particular matchup to set the Broncos offense up. I mean, when your offense is struggling, what's the best remedy? Obviously, your defense forcing turnovers, but then also, hey, if your all-pro return specialist can go out there and set you up with a short field, that's exactly what you need, and that's exactly what Marvin Mims delivered. I mean, a couple of those punts, Cody, there was one punt in particular before he took a couple of them back where you could see that he was like really not sure if the coverage was getting down there, and he like kind of waved his arm, and he called a fair catch ultimately, but he had a bunch of space, and you could tell that he was ticked off after making that decision. Like he was like he looked back at the official and was like, I know I called it right. So he goes out there the next couple of opportunities that he gets, and he takes it down to the other side. I mean, he puts the Broncos in great position to be able to get some points on the board, and that's exactly what they did. I mean, you want to talk about game altering, like that was what you mentioned. The Nate Adkins touchdown that we touched on earlier, that was set up by Marvin Mims in the return game. And obviously, you've got to give credit to the blockers. I saw number 41, Drew Sanders, out there getting out ahead on some blocks as well. Great to see him back in the game. But, man, I think Marvin Mims ultimately is one of the top players deserving of a game ball from this game. Just a game-changing return ability and tremendous job from him.
Well, there's also another guy on the defensive side of the ball that has game-changing return ability, and that is Nik Bonitto. 2 weeks in a row, 2 games in a row, he comes up with a pick six. Now, obviously, look, I hate the rule. I know we talked about it earlier. I hate the rule that they call a fumble, because anyone who uses their eyes, and this is the problem I have with at the end of the year when people vote, people who probably didn't watch this game, they're going to say, oh, fumble recovery touchdown. Watch the game. Like, obviously, a fumble recovery for a touchdown is great. But no, what Nik Bonitto did was special because, hey, he understood, hey, there was a slow player, said this doesn't seem right. And he keyed Anthony Richardson, who was bowing out, like getting a little bit depth back. And he's like, nah, I'm just going to try to jump it. He jumps the throwback to Richardson and takes it to the house there. We love the celebration there. He gets a game ball for that right there. But so it's like you look at what Nik Bonitto has done, Sayre. He has firmly put himself, I think, in the driver's seat here of NFL Defensive Player of the Year. Right now, he's got 11.5 sacks on the year. Granted, he's 1 sack still behind Trey Hendrickson, who's got 12.5 on the season. But what Nick has done in terms of being able to get in the backfield, playing against the run, what he's obviously doing against quarterbacks, but his element in terms of dropping back into coverage and being a legitimate threat to anybody out there in the flat, that right there is a special trait that he has. And obviously, I think that's a big, big play for him. And it revitalized, it gave, like I said it in my post-game report at Mile High Sports, I said Marvin Mims, Nik Bonitto, they resuscitated the Denver Broncos in Sunday's Week 15 game here against the Indianapolis Colts. And I think that really stands out there. If we can maybe hand out, I think, an under-the-radar one, an underrated one, I'm going to give the rookie cornerback Chris Abrams-Drain one as well. I know you had him on yours as well. I loved what I saw from him on a day where Riley Moss did not play. I thought that Chris Abrams-Drain did a really good job in coverage. I also thought he did a really good job in run support and playing through the hands of the receiver. I liked what I saw from the rookie out of Mizzou.
Absolutely. The cornerback position in general, Cody, I know that Levi Wallace was inactive for this game. We saw Damari Mathis out there a little bit. Jaquan McMillan obviously making some plays out there. We mentioned earlier the Pat Surtain interception. Felt like just a better group effort. What we wanted to see after the Cleveland Browns game was that unit taking things personally, right? And so the secondary came out and, obviously they played an exceptional game. I don't know, you may have the numbers offhand, Cody, of, what Anthony Richardson ended this game with in terms of overall completion rate, with the interceptions factored in and things like that. But it was bad enough. Let's hear it. Let's hear what it was there, because
so he finished 17 of 38 passing for 172 yards. And 2 interceptions and a passer rating of 36.3. He was a little bit of a force on the ground, though. I was talking to Broncos players after the game. They said, man, they were like, he's hard to bring down. He's a big body dude. But Denver adjusted well in this game.
When you see Jonathan Franklin Myers hanging off of a guy and him not even moving, like he wasn't even being dragged to the ground. There was a point in the game, and there was another, John Franklin Myers did get home for a sack in this game, Cody. It was so funny. Like he jumped on top of Anthony Richardson. He's like, I'm not letting this guy get away from this one, because there at one point, I mean, he's literally hanging off of him and the guy wasn't moving. I think it was Malcolm Roach had a dead to rights safety in this game, and it was hanging off of him. Jonah Ellis in his face batted the ball down as Anthony Richardson somehow got rid of the ball. I mean, the guy is a physical specimen, if nothing else. So he avoided a safety by, catching his own pass and dragging Malcolm Roach in the back of the end zone there. Pretty impressive stuff. But the secondary is the story from this game. An interception from Brandon Jones was obviously tide turning as well. How many of these guys didn't force a turnover in this game or have a big play on the ball, Cody? I mean, Brandon Jones, you get an interception. Pat Surtain, you get an interception. PJ Locke, you forced a fumble. All these guys were out there doing Riley Moss proud. And from what I saw in the pregame, it looks like the dude's getting ready to come back relatively soon. So he might be hopefully at full strength here in the near future.
Yeah, hopefully Riley can make his return potentially on Thursday. Unfortunately for the Broncos, they're not going to have a lot of days to prepare. We're obviously get practice in. They'll come in on Monday. They'll watch film. They'll get a lift. They'll go through the recovery aspect. Tuesday, they'll have a practice where essentially they're not going to be able to do much physically. They're not going to have pads on. It's probably going to be a walkthrough. Wednesday's a walkthrough, and then Thursday night football against the Los Angeles Chargers. But yeah, I think that, Marvin Mims, the defense, those guys that you mentioned that forced turnovers, get a game ball. Dondre Tillman got a sack in this game. Obviously very happy for him, stepping up there at edge rusher. Nik Bonitto, I mean, just the defense, they got the Broncos in a hole early on, but they clawed their way out of it, and obviously special teams helped play. So defense, special teams, they made big plays when it mattered the most here. And then obviously the Broncos offense overcame some of those negative plays, and Bo Nix shook off those 3 interceptions. He threw 3 touchdowns there. And obviously you want to see some improvement here from the offense going in against the Chargers. And it all starts with maybe being able to run the football, which, hey, against that Chargers defense, that's going to be a tough task here. And they're going to play a lot of zone coverage as well. So How can the Broncos and Bo Nix respond? We'll hear from Broncos head coach Sean Payton on Monday morning on a conference call. We'll get you all your news, analysis, and more. Plus, you can look forward to a crossover Thursday this week on Thursday Night Football, plus the post-game report. A short week here for the Broncos and a jam-packed week for all you everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Share us your game balls from Sunday's win here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. Broncos Country, we'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.